All right, so we're going to talk about the buffered reader. Okay, so the buffered reader is another way to read from a file other than the scanner class. We're still talking about text files in this context. So this is a buffered reader, and it came out before we ever had scanner. So this is kind of legacy code at this point. This isn't code that you're going to want to write. When you're writing your own code, you're almost always going to want to use a scanner. If you are using legacy code or writing with legacy code, then you're probably going to see a buffered reader, and that's why it's important to understand where this comes into play. So this comes into play because before Java 5, right, there was no scanner. So instead, we had this buffered reader class. And I actually had to use the buffered reader when I was in my undergrad. So you all don't have to do this as much, but I had to do it. And we had the main methods of read line and read. Now, the scanner for comparison, let's do a little bit of a comparison here. So here we have a scanner. On the right side, we're going to have a scanner. On the left side, we have buffered reader. So this is after Java 5, we have the scanner, all right? And we have read line. Actually, it would be, I believe it's next line in this case. I actually don't know for certain about this one, this read, but we do have next line. We have next int, and we have some other next options here. I believe there's like next char. I think there is a next boolean. So there's some other options in here. I don't know exactly if these are the correct method names. So you'll want to verify those. I do know next line and next int. These two. Oop, these two here. These two are correct. The next line, next int. Those are correct. I'm not entirely certain about the wording on the other ones, but we have all these different methods to read in things from a file, from the command line, from various input streams. So we don't have to um, make sure that we're getting the right kind of thing. We don't have to parse out the type of data that we're trying to get, right? Before we had scanner, we only had this read line and read. So this read line and read are the only way we could get input. We had to parse it ourselves. So there's two things we'd use to do this. The first was the, where is it? The string tokenizer class. So string tokenizer. And I'm not going to go over how to use these exactly because there's really good examples in your book. The examples start on page, I said this in a previous one, they start on page 603. So string tokenizer, they talk about that and using it as well as showing examples of a general use of buffered reader. But the string tokenizer allowed us to parse their strings. And then the other thing we would do is use wrapper classes to actually parse it into the data that we needed. So we would do things like integer dot parse int, and we pass in our line here, right? And that would give us an integer that we would be able to use in the rest of our program. So that's how we used to have to do this. But now you have nextInt, you have nextChar, you've got all these different great, wonderful things from Scanner that you're always going to want to use. You're never going to want to use buffered reader unless you absolutely have to. You may need to do it for some labs, but I think we mostly have you using the scanner. So just make sure that you understand how this generally works. It's going to be very useful. The other thing is that that's really interesting is with the scanner, you can check for the end of a file using basically has next, right? So if we go back over here on the scanner side, we have the has next method, which returns whether or not there is something next in the file. On the buffered reader, we don't have that. Instead, what we do is we basically do a while loop. I'm trying to find the example here in the book so that I have an example to go off of. We do while not, let's see here. Where did that example go? Here we go. Okay, so after we get a line, like we have everything else set up, we're going to have a while line does not equal null. And above here, we have something where it's reading in that line. So we're going to do something like line equals read line. Well, it would be buffered reader.read line. But you get the idea. We're not going to write that out. You'd have buffered reader.read line up there. And we're not going to worry about that right now. But we have while line does not equal null. Then we're going to do stuff here inside this loop. And that's it. That's how you check to see if there's an in a file. If you have null, so this null here is what determines whether or not we are going to have something to actually work with. What happens when you get the end of a file with a buffered reader is you have to check to see if that line is valid. And there's basically two ways to look at this. You can use the null, or it also returns a -1, which basically just means null in this case. So you just use the not equals to null, and it allows you to make sure that you're getting useful data and you're not doing something with gibberish data. You're actually doing something with data from your file, and that you're not going past the file, because if you go past the file, you can get all kinds of problems. So you don't want to do that. So we have to do this while not equals to null. So this is how this here is how to check for your end of file. We usually refer to end of file as EOF. You'll see that as you go through the program more, as you get more experience in programming, that we refer to that as EOF. It just stands for end of file. All right, so in the next video, we're going to talk about path names, we're going to talk about system.air, and we're going to talk about the file class. So it's kind of just a little bit of what doesn't fit into the rest of these videos at the end. And then we're going to talk about binary files, and we'll talk about a couple other things with that as well, such as printing objects out. So I think that's actually going to be 2 more videos after this one, so make sure you're looking out for those.